Favorite condenser mic is, well, you know what? I'll answer this. As long as you guys can can hear and see what I'm saying, or at least hear what I'm saying. I'll try to answer one of these questions. I'll do a quick one. All right, here's an easy one. Here's an easy one to talk about right here. At the Source, thank you so much for like the amazing conversations. Our friends at the Source Studios on YouTube. This guy is just like always coming at me with the good ones, and I love it, dude. Like never change. Yeah, okay, so you hear me, the video is kind of slow. Okay, good. Okay, I'm gonna answer this question really quick, and then I gotta get off because I do have a 7 o'clock that's coming in here, and I don't wanna interrupt the stream. But on vocals, limiting into, oh. All right, so we're back for the moment. On vocals, limiting into compression or compression into limiting. All right, with vocals, you always start with scaled compression. Layer your compressors on top of each other. Use a really super transparent compressor, something just totally stock, and just have that like you start with some de-essing, and then after that have a nice compressor that's just shaving off like 1 to 3 dB. Not much, right? You just want to control it just enough so that it's, and you want a really hyper clean digital compressor. I'm talking about in your DAW, something that's super fast, super transparent. Then after that, you can go for some of the more goopy, gummy sounding analog compressors, things like 1176s and LA2As, things that honestly, like, you know, color the sound a bit more, things that when you drive into them, it adds a little more sound. And I'll tell you my personal vocal rig, which is, like I said, a bit of de-essing first. Then I'll use just the stock Cubase compressor on a chain because, like I said, super transparent, super fast, just doing very little work. And then I'll go into either an 1176 or an API 2500, and I really like just kind of hammering the vocals at that point, especially if we're talking about any kind of like modern or like, you know, slightly aggressive music. You need that super upfront sound, right? So I'll probably shave like anywhere from like 5 to 10 dB sometimes, but usually not trying to like hang at that 10 dB gain reduction, closer to 5, because then after that, I'll take that more compressed signal and shove it into my EQ, which my favorite EQ is the Sheps 73. It's a 1073 emulator, and I just love the sound of it. I love what it does for vocals. I like the shelves. I like the mid-range Q. It's really nice. It also drives really well, and you can go from that compressed signal into an EQ, and then after that EQ, a great thing that I like to do after that is an LA2A, but I'll put it in limiting mode, especially on like really aggressive vocals. I like putting that LA2A into limiting mode, like all the way at the end of the chain. And the other cool thing about the LA2A is that it's a really, really slow compressor limiter. So what you end up doing is like you can feed a lot more extreme types of EQs, EQ moves into that compressor limiter, and it's not going to make it go crazy and sound all wonky and then like just like choke your vocals out. It's just going to, like, especially if you run your gain staging properly, it's going to saturate it in the way that the plugin designers really intended for, because all of your plugins, and especially compressors and EQs in particular, and ones that emulate analog hardware, they all have a bit of a sweet spot. And I think there's a great video from Warren Hewart talking about, and if you've ever heard of him, Warren Hewart, Produce Like a Pro. He's another YouTube guy, a lot like Glenn Fricker, but he's like the super nice guy version of Glenn. And he talked about how all of your plugins that you have that emulate analog gear, they all have a sweet spot, usually around minus 18 dB. feeding into them RMS value. Like usually feeding into them around there is like kind of like the sweet spot where they like to hit. But with those slower compressor limiters, things like the LA2A, etc., you can feed into them a little bit higher, and they're not going to go crazy from it in the same way that something like a 2500, at max settings would just choke it out and go nuts. So yeah, layer your compressors before your EQ, and then have your nice EQ on there. Any little tight Q cleanups that you have to do, if you got to get in there with like some really narrow band cleanups, resonances from the microphone, resonances just from the room or from the person's voice itself. Then going into a limiter all the way at the end, and then also at like somewhere along that stage, either before or after the limiter, throwing another stage of de-essing on there just as a final bit to just shave off that top of the things like that can really build up from all that layered compression. Now, again, when you're layering your compressors, you're not trying to get like 10 dB on every compressor. Your very first one, super transparent, 1 to 2, maybe no, I wouldn't even say 3 dB, 1 to 2 dB of compression on the loudest moments. It's really just more of a rider. Then after that, more colored compressor, and you end up with like that, like more of that heavier comp sound, EQ, and then have your final compression limiting stage at the end to taste, I would say. Be careful with if you're using an LA2A. If you go even just a couple notches too far on that peak reduction, it clamps it. I mean, like it's tough on a signal, so be really careful with that. But yeah, throw your limiting at the end, layer your compressors before the EQ, and give that a shot. See how it goes, man.